Hello again. I told you that today was to focus on methodology. So here's a little feedback on what happened during the 19th century in England. When I say in England, I mean in the Empire and everything. So previously in Britain, you remember that after the death of Charles II, his brother James was crowned as James II. James II, brother of Charles II, was Protestant until 1680, so he was Catholic when he was crowned. It didn't matter because he had two daughters with his first wife, and they were Protestant. Um, when he came on the throne, he was married to a Roman Catholic woman. Catholicism was associated to royal absolutism, so everything was okay. However, in 1687, the Queen announced that she was pregnant, and Parliament feared that it would be a boy because if the baby boy was born, male primogeniture would prevail, and the little boy would become king before his Protestant sisters. So Parliament started to plot against the king. And when in June the Queen gave birth to James Edward, an heir to the throne, well, people were very frightened. So as soon as the next king was born, Tories, well, the aristocracy, and the Whigs, the common, agreed to meet and write a letter to Mary of Orange, heiress to the throne, to do something to avoid his brother to become king. So Mary was married to William of Orange, a Protestant, and Parliament asked him to invade Britain and to accept the crown so that he could re-establish the Protestant faith. So that was the Glorious Revolution. And as William and Mary accepted the Bill of Rights in 1899, well, everything was fine. So the Hanoverian dynasty brought an end to old religious and political conflicts. Britain was expanding at the same time in the south, so in Australia and South Africa, and in the east with India and Hong Kong. Though it lost its American colonies, England was fine. 19th century Britain is often introduced as an era of great social and scientific progress. Indeed, there were many social reforms at the time and also many inventions that eased the lives of the people. However, one led to the other, or at least both. Industrialization and social reforms are intertwined. Between 1750 and 1901, the empire blossomed so that the sun never really set on British soil. We can either see 19th century Britain as an era starting in 1750 and ended with the death of Queen Victoria, or a post-Waterloo era after the defeat of Napoleon. If you don't really remember what happened between the 1500 and the 1750, you got the link on the drive to watch a 10-minute video on that. So, the Industrial Revolution and Knowledge Organizer, we saw that you can either pause and read the little inscriptions because I'm not going to read that. Okay, you can do that. So, the important things, however, is that at the beginning of the era, the situation was tough. There was rural exodus. The commune had no rights, only duties. Living conditions were horrible, with the health system and everything. The poor were not helped. Low wages, bad conditions bad working conditions, bad living conditions. So it was not great to be a British citizen at the beginning of the 19th century. However, what do we know? We know that science evolved, that suffrage evolved, that polos changed, that social laws started, and about Dickens, about the Brontes and everything. So there was a cultural revival also. Um, so 19th century great invention, we talked about that either in America or in England. Things changed. For example, and well, for example, there was this scene that we talked about, about vaccination. We discussed the different parts of this engraving. It shows that a scene from the smallpox, and it was in London. The cartoonist's name is James Gilray. This engraving was done on June 12th, 1802. Remember that smallpox was a common killer in 19th century Britain. It spread rapidly and killed around 30% of those who contracted it and left many survivors blinded or scarred. In the 1850s, the government passed a series of laws that made vaccination against smallpox compulsory. So what we notice here is that people were not very happy with that. That's why it's called the anti-vaccine society. The doctor we assume is Edward Jenner. Okay, it's the guy that invented the vaccine, and it started in the 1790s. So we talked about that, and remember the importance of the link between the title and the engraving. Well, here it's called the cow pork, or the wonderful effects of the new inoculation. And you see the little anti-vaccine society, so we get all the irony of this engraving and the fact that the guy was against it. Well, we talked about that this morning, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Petallow. So remember Petallow, Manchester Bullhand, cartoon of a Bullhand, Manchester, 1819. Okay, so basically, from 1750 to 1832, no political changes of any note took place in Britain. Only men with money and property rights could vote, no women. The House of Lords could overrule any law passed by the Commons. Only men could be in the House of Commons and Lords. However, with Britain's growing dependence on its working class to keep up with the Industrial Revolution, without the workers, factories, and mines, etc., it would have simply ground to a halt everything. So, why was there no recognition of their importance in the political world? Well, there was a fear of the working class, but also a relief that they should be kept in their place, hence an engraving such as this one. Men such as the Duke of Wellington did not want rail line, for example, because they thought that it would give poor people the ability to travel and a chance to cause trouble. He believes that only his type knew how to govern, and those that did not belong to the upper classes should only put up with what was going on. As a result of this attitude, some political absurdities occurred. The important cities of the Industrial Revolution were barely represented in the House of Commons, like Manchester, Liverpool, or Birmingham, and the so-called rotten boroughs existed. Okay, we will see rotten boroughs in the next slide. Anyway, let's focus on Petallow and this engraving. It seemed that as the common people were about to revolt, the government encouraged the brutal treatment of them. In 1819, people in Manchester held a mass meeting at St. Peter's Field to listen to speeches demanding parliamentary reform. The main organizer was a name called Hunt. The organizers wanted a non-violent event, and halfway through the gathering, local magistrates declared that the meeting was illegal and sent the army in to break it up. So there were 11 people killed and 400 people were wounded, and it was called Petallow in mocking tones of the British victory at Waterloo. We can see that here with, on the one hand, we got people with a paper in the hand asking for change, and the bull that represents Hunt that is charging the cavalry. And then remember the contrast thing. This section was originally published in a brochure from the 19th century, just to spread awareness about current matters. We talked about that this morning. Even the gap between the columns is a visual sign of the differences between the rich and the poor. and they imply the complexity of the power dynamics between the classes and encourage further critical thinking. Uh, like it's written, with where scars are for continuing war, are anxious for peace. So all those contracts that are are presented. So this is the beginning of what is really important, the Great Reform Act of 1832. So we already talked about the cartoon, the cartoon itself. So let's talk about the law. In 1830, William IV became king. He did not like the idea of change, but he felt that if change was to take place, it should be controlled by Parliament and not forced on the country by revolutionaries. In 1832, the first political change in centuries took place. It's called the Great Reform Act. So, what did it introduce? This cartoon is about rotten boroughs, and 56 of them were removed as constituencies, and 30 small constituencies which retuned 2 MPs now only retune 1. So it means that basically people were heard. Also, the large industrial cities were given more MPs in keeping with their size and importance. So, in general, the middle class was given the right to vote. The number of those who could vote rose for 435,000 to 650,000. But all of these improvements were still three major weaknesses. No women could vote, only 1 man in 7 could vote, and there was no secret ballot. So some people at the time saw this act as the beginning of a great new age of democracy, while others saw it as a great loss opportunity. However, what no one denied was that it was a start and that there was no going back. In fact, after 1832, a new type of parliament passed more reformist acts than any before, including numerous factory and mines acts, which forbade the abuse of children and female workers. As people began to realize how bad these conditions were in many factories and started to campaign for improvement, there was a lot of resistance from factory owners who felt it would slow down the running of their factories and make their products more expensive. Many people also did not like the government interfering in their lives. For example, parents who sent their kids to work because they needed the money. They did not do that for fun. So one of the most important movements of the 19th century was the birth of Chartism, and basically Chartism in the 1830s paved the way to the labor movement that we know today. So Chartism gave a voice to working class people, though working class mean lower classes, but still they asked for 6 main points that were a vote for all men, the secret ballot, no property qualification to become an MP, the payment of MPs, electoral districts of equal size, and annual election for parliament. So many things were dealt with in the Great Reform Act of 1832, like, for example, the fact that some industrial cities had no representation, the fact that only wealthy male property owners could vote. Okay, things started to change in 1832. But things after the Chartist movement started went further, though Chartism in itself did not change anything. The thing is that by 1867, one man out of 3 men could vote. So it was a great improvement, and it was brought by Benjamin Disraeli, and afterwards William Gladstone in 1885 pushed for more reform, and things worked out. Though, it was very tough on them because you know about everything that happened in the workhouses and well everything that Dickens is talking about in his books actually. So if you don't want to know more about how life was like in the 19th century in England, well just read Dickens because it is actually very realistic and I think it would be less boring than just listening to me. So a second thing, well, third thing, well, another thing that was very, very important is that you know that England was called the workshop of the world. And well, the workshop of the world actually started to want to be acknowledged. So we know about the Great Reform Act and all the laws that passed afterwards, notably in 1867 and in 16 in 8 I said in 1867 and in 1887 or 86, don't remember. Anyway, by 1833, there were many factory acts. The government passes what was to be the first of many acts dealing with working conditions and hours. So at first, there was limited power to enforce this act, but as the century progressed, the rules were enforced more strictly. Nonetheless, the hours and working conditions were still very tough by today's standards, and no rules were in place to protect adult male workers. So, uh, the Industrial Revolution created an unprecedented demand for female and child labor. Children had always worked alongside their parents, but before the 19th century, they usually worked part time. In the new textile factories, women and children were often made to work very long hours, 12 to 14 hours a day. So the government was aware of the problem, and in 1819, they passed an act that made it illegal for children under 9 to work in cotton mills. However, it was not enforced, and people had to wait 1833 for inspectors' job to be created and for inspectors to actually watch over factories. So in 1833, uh, children under 9 were banned from working in textile mills. Children aged 9 to 13 were not allowed to work more than 12 hours a day for a total or 48 hours a week. And children aged 13 to 18 must not work for more than 69 hours a week. Furthermore, nobody under 18 was allowed to work at night. In mines, in 1842, the Miners Act banned women and children under 10 from working in underground mines. So this act was actually revolutionary and started to give some power to the people. Another thing changed in at the time. It's the poor laws. Remember, in 1601, Elizabeth I created the first poor laws, and as previously the Catholic Church had been replaced and monasteries and lands had been sold to avoid the bankruptcy of the kingdom, it was afterwards the state's job to take care of the poor. So before 1834, the cost of looking after the poor was growing more and more expensive every year, and this cost was paid by the middle and upper classes in each town through their local taxes. Um, well, people grew angry against those poor because they were always thought to be very lazy and as they want people who wanted to avoid working. So after years of complaint, a new polo was introduced in 1834. And the new polo was meant to reduce the cost of looking after the poor and impose a system which would be the same all over the country. Under the new poor law, parishes were grouped into unions, and each union had to build a workhouse if they did not already have one. Except in special circumstances, poor people could now only get help if they were prepared to leave their homes and go into a workhouse. So it was very tough, and many families split up, and the poor were made to wear uniform, and the diet was atrocious, and there were also strict rules and regulations to follow. To follow, there were inmates, there were male, there were female, there were young and old people. They were all mixed up together and doing unpleasant jobs such as picking alchem or breaking stones. And children's afterwards could also, well, when I say children's, I mean could often be sent to mines and stuff like that. So it was awful, very awful. And basically in the end, workhouses contain only orphans and the old and the sick and the insane. So not surprisingly, the new poor law was very unpopular, and it only seemed to punish the poorest of the poorest, and well, the ones that were poor, though it was not their fault. So the pool was very, very, very unpopular, and many people demonstrated against it. So this is my PowerPoint in general, so I did not have nothing to say here. I just hope you've understood many things. Here you have you have everything and you need to analyze this cartoon. Remember, it's man is but a worm. We talked about the references. We talked about the worms here. We talked about the evolution of the species, the book by Darwin. We talked about the hand of God and how Darwin is represented. We did not talk about COURS, but you have a little link on YouTube to deal with this picture. What I wanted to use is that the myth of 19th century England, its opium dens and its dark side, because uh, using figures such as Jack the Ripper or Sherlock Holmes. I prefer Sherlock Holmes, but Jack the Ripper is, I won't say fun because he did atrocious things, but it can be used in class with children in middle school or in high school. So that's why civilization is quite fun for everyone. And you remember this morning's conclusion when I asked you, can we consider 19th century as a progressive era? Some said yes, some said no. I hope this little video will help you more. Don't forget that it was a time when the empire developed. It was a time when slavery stopped, 1833 in the empire. They were the new rich because merchants and the aristocracy grew a lot. Because of the industrialization, there was a new way of living, new technologies that led to rural exodus, that led cities to be overcrowded, which basically brings us back to what Malthus said um, about overpopulation. And also, well, can we talk about social reforms as something linked to progress regarding the Factory Acts or the poor law, or even what Chartism led to, like many people that could vote, um, the secret ballot and stuff like that. So is it progress, or is it only an evolution that was brought because the industrialization made society change? I remember Adam Smith talked about free market, no, about free trade. So what happens when there is no taxation on imports within the empire? What does it lead to? And stuff like that. So there are many things to take into consideration when we deal with the idea of a progressive era. And also, what definition do you give to progress? And to finish the not fun fact with the different dates, I still haven't changed it. And of course, as this is recorded, I will not. But if you have questions, don't hesitate to email me, or if you don't have questions, good for you. Bye.